Welcome to the Data Strategy Show. My name's Samir Sharma and I'll be your host for the next 40 minutes. My guest today is Kyle Winterbottom. Kyle is the founder and managing director of Orbition, which was established in September 2020. Orbition is a specialist recruitment agency within the data and analytics space. Kyle is also a host of his own own podcast, Driven by Data. I've been on it, and hopefully you've heard that. But Kyle's my guest today on my show, and it's a real pleasure to have Kyle on the show. I do hope you enjoy this conversation. Please do share, like, and comment. Thank you. Kyle Winterbottom, thank you very much for coming onto the Data Strategy Show. Great to have you here, Kyle.
Thank you very much, Samir. Absolute pleasure.
Great. Listen, Kyle, let's go straight into it. So tell me a little bit about your background and what you're up to now.
This should be brief. No, so I've been in the data and analytics talent space for 10 years. In the middle of last year, I set up my own business that operates exclusively within the realms of data and analytics talent. So we're headquartered here in the UK. About 70% of the work we do is still UK based, but got a presence out in the US as well. So, so yeah, and I guess outside of traditional, day-to-day recruitment and search, we quite active in the communities. So we have events. Obviously, we've got our own podcast in this space, and so on and so forth. Really. So that's it's a bit about me.
That's fantastic. Listen, so I think I'm always interested to know what the market is doing in terms of data. What are the trends? So what are some of the trends that you're seeing at the moment, and how is the market coming out of COVID? Post this era when we're sort of slowly releasing our lockdown. What are you finding?
I mean, I think obviously, given that data and analytics is, on the lips of every business leader and executive in the world, I think we've been lucky, really. I think in terms of numbers and metrics, we were probably back to normal figures by Q3 last year from a recruitment standpoint.
Okay.
So I think there was obviously an initial shock, how long is this thing going to last? What the impact's going to have? But I think once organizations realized we could be in and out of this cycle for a little while, and it wasn't just going to be a 2, 4, 6 week thing, I think people got comfortable with hiring and onboarding remotely, which was good to see. And I think, as I said, by Q3 most businesses were back in full flow. We had working with a lot of organizations where they had to go and get reapproval for budget that they spend from a recruitment standpoint, and most of the roles in the realms of data analytics were the only ones that actually got reapproved, which is a good sign, and probably quite lucky for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So coming out of, so pre-COVID, you're working in the industry and you're seeing a ramp up of particular roles around digital transformation and so on, and that whole area. There was an interesting article I read, and it was more US focused, and I just wanted to get your view on whether you see the same focus here. So obviously, whenever it was 10 years ago, the data science was seen as the sexiest job in the 21st century. But the article I was reading has sort of flipped it around now, and data science, I think, hasn't outgrown or lived. It's still in existence, but I think the data scientist was being asked to do too much, perhaps. And apart from being a magician, they also had to be a data cleanser, a pipeline builder, and putting models into production and so on. So the article actually said that the demand for data scientists had dropped by about 40% they were seeing in the US. But the demand for data engineering was going up, vastly in 20 to 30 to 40% up, and even more in some states. So what's the trend that you're seeing here in the market, UK and Europe, or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's definitely the same. I think it's the same wherever you are.
Yeah.
Obviously, we spoke about this offline, but I think even as little as 5 years ago, data science was the thing, right? Every organization were tripping over themselves to go and hire data scientists because, well, that was cool to do, right? If you had a data scientist working for you, you were kind of cutting
Yeah.
edge and you were data driven and all of that type of stuff. And I think, as you said, most of these people either weren't able or weren't willing often to do what the business actually wanted them to do, which was actually to be all things to all people.
Yeah.
So most of the time, these data scientists are very rarely spending much time at all, doing data science. Often it's sourcing data, finding it, cleaning it, prepping it, moving it from A to B where it needs to be, all, managing it, all of that type of stuff, which, when they get into those environments and realize, oh, this is a bit boring. This is,
It's not
I
what I
didn't go to
really wanted to
university to
do.
do this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that then leads into the trend which you're talking about, so over the last 2 to 3 years, especially now, organizations have realized, okay, well, we need to get this whole data engineering piece right to be able to get the data from where it is to where it needs to be, in order then to let our data scientists actually do some data science on it. And I think we're on a journey with that. But I think that's been the case everywhere in the world. It doesn't surprise me that the US are kind of shouting about that, because naturally I think they're a little bit ahead of us in terms of where they're at on that journey across the spectrum, really. And outside of that, some other interesting things. So obviously especially with COVID, digital analytics has become a big driver for a lot of businesses now. Most businesses are looking at hiring in that space. And data academies is another one. Every organization now looking at kind of how they build a data academy internally. And I think the interesting thing about that for me is that I think when businesses first started to do that a few years ago, it was more around how do we bring people into our data analytics teams and help them to develop and upskill. And I think that's flipped on its head now. It's become more of a tool for driving literacy across the organization.
Okay.
It's more now, how do we upskill our users, our stakeholders, our execs? So it's been more used in that realm.
Yeah, I've heard very recently that there's a number of large companies who are creating their own data academies, and I think that's more in line with what you said in terms of education, and just getting the language similar or simplified, I should say, for a data and analytics person to be speaking to a business person, but equally a business person to be speaking to the data and analytics teams in a way that everybody understands each other. But on that note, though, you often talk about and you often post around cultural transformation, and I know you and we talk about that a lot. What are the challenges you see within the data and analytics space, and what are companies tending not to be looking at in cultural transformation, and what should they be looking at?
Ooh, this could get me in a whole host of trouble. I'm only joking. So I think the cultural transformation piece is becoming more and more evident and more obvious, because I mean, for me, I personally think this comes down to, this just needs to be tackled earlier on in that journey. Like, these businesses go on this journey and it's often a case of, right, what do we need to do this? Well, we need teams of people, we need certain tools and technologies to be able to build these solutions. But I think when push comes to shove, we get to that point, we've built all of these solutions, and then still we're not seeing the value come out of the other side. And then we're getting to the point where we realize, okay, so this is the barriers to entry for success on this are cultural. Are the people that sit and use the data day in, day out aren't bought in to what we're trying to achieve. And I think that probably just needs to be addressed sooner in that roadmap, to kind of say, like, look, here's what you need to do. Of course, yes, it's going to cost you a certain amount of money on tech and tools and people, and it's going to take you timelines and timescales to build those solutions. But actually, if you want to get this right, you need to tackle the people piece first. And that's probably going to be the hardest piece to tackle, right?
How easy a conversation is that for you to have with somebody who's coming to you and saying, "Oh, I just want to get somebody in to roll out a bit of technology"?
I mean, it's an easy conversation in the fact that I'm very comfortable in having it.
Yeah.
I think it's a tough one, right? Because the problem for these people, if someone's out there looking for, a head of data analytics or a VP or even a CDO, I think my view on this has been that for whatever reason, once people get in on the inside, that change becomes even more difficult. It's a bit odd, really, when you think of it like that, because these are, people are being paid a lot of money to really drive this strategy and roadmap, and ultimately they go in there and they try to make this change happen, and they get pushbacks from the owners or the business leaders or whatever the case may be. I just think it often comes down to that conversation needs to be had right at the start. But I think the reason why it's probably not happening too much is because, well, effectively someone's got to try to talk themselves out of a job, right? Because if you're going to go and interview for a CDO role or a very senior data leadership role, and you're really trying to get under the skin of what's going on in the business, what do they want to achieve, what's going to be the biggest blockers to achieving that success. It's going to come down to that cultural piece, but then effectively you've got to try and almost talk the business leader out of doing this, right? So it's going to be really difficult. We've got to change the way people think about this, and so forth and so on. And I think just to go back to your analogy before around the whole data science piece, that's what happened day in, day out for me. I'd go and sit in a meeting room with a business leader or a data leadership figure, and they say, I want to hire a data scientist. And I'm like, okay, tell me what you want them to do. I'm not bothered about tech. I don't want to, we're not having a game of buzzword bingo.
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
want you to tell me business wise what you want this person to do.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, I'd say, you don't need a data scientist.
Right.
You need a very good analyst.
Yep.
Because you're not doing any data scientist. And you're going to pay 20, 30 grand more for this person who are probably going to come in and then they'll leave because they're not doing any data science.
They're not happy and so on. Yeah.
So I'm comfortable having the conversation. I just think there probably needs to be more talk about it. And I think,
Yeah. I think there's probably got to be because of the acceleration of where we've gone in this whole transformation cycle around digital and cloud and specifically data. I think there probably needs to be another refreshing or a refresh of a conversation up at a board level and a C-suite level, and that's probably where we need to strive for the conversations that you and I have, the conversations that, we have as a community, because there's loads of people who are talking about this right now. And you and I, have been talking about it for years, ad nauseum, I think. But interesting enough, I think, slowly, waves are being made, but people are focused too much on tech. Let's look at something which I think is interesting for me, that I've observed over the years. We've had, a head of data, a chief data officer, a chief data and analytics officer, a chief analytics officer, a chief AI officer, and so on and so forth. And these titles are growing bigger and wider and more colorful and, more imaginative on what they're doing. What's your take on how organizations are attempting to understand what each of these people, these roles does and how it fits uniquely into their organization?
So I think titles is probably one of the biggest challenges that our industry faces, and that just comes down to the fact that there is a complete lack of standardization.
Right.
And look, every organization is slightly different, of course. So titles are always going to mean slightly different things to different people, and it depends where they are at on that journey. But
Sure.
I think at some point over the next few years, that standardization is going to have to take place for the industry to carry on growing, because I guess it really comes down to what this person or what this business wants this person to achieve. But that's often part of the problem, right? They kind of, especially at the leadership level, they want to bring people in, and the philosophy around that, if you will, is that
Yep.
person's going to take us there. They're going to come in, they're going to give us the strategy, they're going to give us the roadmap, and they're going to go away and do what they need to do and get us to that point. But often that cultural piece prevents that from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And often people get brought in, and ultimately, their job is to deliver on a predefined strategy by the business, as opposed to it being their strategy, if that makes sense. So I think the lack of standardization is difficult, and that's why, from a talent perspective, it becomes really difficult, right? Unless you know this space and you can get under the skin of what a business is looking for. You can have the same job title across 4 different organizations, and they mean completely different things.
Yeah. So how do you get that standardization going? What are there things that you as you as your organization or collectively as in the recruiting space, people are thinking, oh, we need to start to try and influence this stuff?
I mean, I think there's, naturally there's groups and kind of subsets of titles, right? But the data engineering thing is a great example. There's, depending upon which organization you're in, you can have, data engineers that really mean different things. And what tends to happen is, as those journeys evolve and title, data engineering now has become a trend, just like data science was. So now you're getting organizations calling people or teams of people data engineers,
right,
when they're not really. So I think internally we kind of categorize, in architecture, engineering, science, as you would, but ultimately, just using that data engineering piece as an example, I often think about it in 2 ways. And when I'll speak with an organization, I kind of say, okay, what are you after? Are you after a software engineer that's delivered on a number of big data projects, like big data technology projects, or are you after a traditional ETL pipeline
data
builder?
architect type person?
And it's normally one of those. But as I said, now, because of it's become a bit trending to have data engineers, getting people, you look at their background and you're like, well, you're a BI developer.
Yes.
But now they're calling them data engineers because it's cool to do so.
So the next cool thing, maybe I should put tag on mine, data engineer. I'd come up on everybody's searches then, wouldn't I? No, but I think it's an interesting thing, because there are particular standards I've seen out there. One particular standard I've got to know about, mainly because I'm working with one of my clients on this, is SFIA, and this is a standard body that looks at job titles and then sets out what the definition of that particular role, and then gives it levels. So that's something that I've seen that might be a way forward, perhaps, but doesn't really cut across the entire data and analytics stack. It's very generic again. It cuts across different roles.
I think, it's just a maturity thing, right? We're still relatively early on in that journey compared to finance or operations or, tech or whatever the case may be. So organizations, kind of are just doing what they think is right, and they're calling it what they think works for them. And that's fine. But obviously it does cause some issues. And I think it's, one of the big things for me is that I always bang on about this on LinkedIn, is that ultimately we tend to start to assess the wrong skills based on that. Recruitment historically has been, if you needed a SQL developer, well, it's pretty obvious you can go and find one of them, right? Based on a job title. But now there's 3 or 4 different variations or definitions of a data engineer. Okay, so if you go and find them, unless you know this space, you don't know what you're looking at, which is why a lot of businesses really struggle to recruit if they, their internal recruitment teams, because they just don't understand the nuances, right? So it's very that leads us into, it's like, well, okay, they need to have all of this thing on their CV or their resume or the LinkedIn profile, which, is then Python, R, Spark, Scala, Kafka, yada, yada, yada. And that's how we are going benchmarking against whether this person is right or not for us. And the data engineering piece is probably a bad example of that, right? Because that is by far the most technical discipline.
Yes.
But that happens across the board. It happens with data science. It happens at the leadership level, right? The amount of adverts I've seen, chief data officer needs to have a PhD in data science. And I'm like,
I mean, I just don't get it. I've seen heads of data or heads of data and analytics who need to roll up their sleeves and be able to do, all the programming that you've just mentioned, which just doesn't make sense to me. You're looking for somebody who's just could be a DevOps person or, or a data ops or whatever it might be, but it just doesn't reek to me as a person who's in a leadership position should be rolling their sleeves up. Maybe from time to time they may do. They need to refresh their skills probably in that sense. But it's I saw something I think it was last week where I cannot for the life of me remember. I wish I had the name of the technology, but there was a role that was out there, and the guy was highlighting the fact that it said, let's just say Scala, for example. Okay, Scala programmer or needed with 15 years of experience, and the guy who created Scala only created it 7 years ago, and he was highlighting how absurd and ludicrous this whole thing is. So how do we get over that as well? I mean, it's sort of just plain sense in the sense in the realms of I need to have somebody who's got this particular skill set. I can't say I need to find somebody who's got a skill set in Azure and they've got 15 years experience. That's just BS. There isn't anybody out there. How do you stop that kind of, what are the conversations you have with your clients to add a dose of reality?
So, I mean, I think that comes down to just some simple questioning, right, around what they want this person to actually achieve. And I think depending upon where this person is going to be sat within the organization will determine that in terms of what's actually important versus what's not. But I think, everything that I see and hear on LinkedIn, for the most part, and same in the recruitment landscape, same in the vendor landscape. When we're talking about data, what we're actually talking about is technology that's associated with data.
Yes,
it's a data.
Correct.
It's a data tool. We're not talking about the commercial. We take that data as it is to make better business decisions, to ultimately drive value. It's all very much around the process of building
a platform
or a product, or whatever you want to call it. And of course, I think my message sometimes gets, misconstrued in that sense, because I'm not saying that that's not important, because without these products or platforms or tools, of course, we wouldn't be able to build what we need to build to, use the data effectively. But ultimately that shouldn't always be the driver. And I think, I think that's what we're talking about here is really what do you want this person to do? Because ultimately, back to what I said before, we end up assessing the wrong skills, right? If you want someone, especially at the leadership level, who in my opinion should be more strategic, it should be more around, the communication they have with the business, their presentation skills, how much influence they've got, being that translator and storyteller and taking people on that journey. That's the stuff that adds real value in their capacity.
Yeah.
Not if they've got 10 years experience with Python,
So that's interesting that you say that, because that is the whole definition there, right there, that you said of any kind of leadership position. But we seem to be making the same mistakes that maybe other functions or other lines of business have done over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, which is crazy, because a leader is a leader, right? They should be driving the same types of activities, but yet data is just another enabler within a business. So how do you shape those ideas and thoughts and job descriptions without it being too fluffy? What are the areas that you absolutely say, no, if we're going to bring in data leadership, these are the skills that this person needs to have?
Well, I mean, I think that the problem is that this problem that we have is across the board, right? Of course, I think in leadership positions, it's more evident, right?
Yeah,
Because it shouldn't necessarily be about the tech and the tools all the time.
sure.
But for me, even at the, like we talk about data science, it's still a huge part. And of course, their job is building models, a lot of the time, or that's what their job should be. So of course, there's a certain technicality to it. But as I often say to organizations, like, look, you could go and get technically the best data scientist in the world, but if they're going to build you something that you never use, what's the point? Right. So, what would you rather have? Someone that can do something for the business that's, going to move that needle, or someone that can build the sexiest, shiniest machine learning model that you never use because it adds no value. Right. So I think we're on that journey. I think we're starting to realize, I think part of the problem is that the people that need to hear these conversations often aren't very active on platforms like LinkedIn, where we're having that conversation. So that goes then into, well, how do we get this message heard?
You see, it's interesting what you've just said, though, as well. As a data scientist, I the idea that my job is about building models is crazy, in my opinion. Right? The idea should be, or the concept, or the vision for a data scientist should be, as you've just said, a data scientist is the person who enables decision making within a business in order to influence some kind of business outcome, whether that be growth, whether that be customer experience, or whatever that might be. Now, as a business person, who cares what kind of model they've built? Does it give me the outcome that I'm looking for? And can I iterate on that and be able to, whether that's downstream in decision making, or for I don't know, a product that I have to build, or upstream, I'm having a conversation with a customer. I don't really care what's happening there.
I think this is driven, to be honest with you. I think that this obsession with tech is being driven by the way we try to recruit people.
Right.
Because if you think about, especially, we're in a market that is talent short, right? And I can touch on that in a second, because there's a big play in terms of how you should be attracting talent. And as an industry, we're getting, more self-aware that, for example, if you see a job description and it's just littered with tech requirements, that's starting to turn people off, right? So there's language, and I do a lot of kind of workshops, if you want to call them that, with organizations and their internal recruitment teams to say, this is the type of content you should have on a job description that's going to attract people. But that's still not happening, right? So you're getting people that want to get into the industry or are very early on in their career. And those people are going to play a massive part in how successful our future looks like, because at the moment, we've not got enough people in the industry, right, to kind of cater to the demand. But the problem is that these people often, they look at a job description and they think, well, crap, for me to get this job, I need to have X amount of years experience in this, and I need to know every tool under the sun. So they become obsessed by the technology, because that's what they need to be obsessed by just to get the job. So
it's a catch-22 in that sense.
We're focusing on the wrong thing.
On the wrong things, exactly.
On both sides of the coin.
And so I guess the way to change that is to continuously challenge and have the conversations within the community, but be able to break out of the community and have those conversations on a wider context, to get in front of those people who actually are not on the platform, or who are not, showing up and engaging with the content that's out there. So tell me a little bit about the, some of the things that I've seen you write about recently are NEDs, non-executive directors. What's going on in that space? What's your views on the NED in the data space?
So I think that's the way the industry is going to go. Just purely based on the fact that, the amount of data leadership figures I talk to on a daily basis who are in roles where they feel that they can't drive the required change.
Right.
And it's ludicrous to me, right? Because, you've got chief data officers out there that are being appointed and paid huge sums of money, but they can't, they're not being allowed to go and do the job that they want to do. And for some reason,
why is that? That's an interesting one.
You know what? I don't know why it is, to be honest with you. I think this whole cultural piece just ties directly back into it, because I think, business leaders are looking at this and think, right, do we want to make better decisions? Of course we do. Do we want to make more money? Of course we do. Do we want to do that? Do we want to put data at the heart of the business to do that? Of course we do. But ultimately, when you say, right, well, this is a journey that's going to take years, not weeks or months, and we're going to have to change the way every single person in this business thinks about and how they operate day to day. And there's going to be a lot of pushback and challenge around that. Often it's easier to put your head in the sand, right? But what's still happening is they go, well, okay, well, we still want to be data driven, so let's carry on. We'll go and buy the data lake and we'll go and build all these solutions, but they don't tackle that kind of cultural piece at source. So I think, and it's odd that we have to think about it like this, but I think the only way that's going to change is if you've got, kind of senior data leadership people that have done really good jobs internally in organizations that kind of go into this NED landscape and kind of sits on the board, and it's not, can be that advisor, because for whatever reason, when they're sat in situ, even though it'd be the same type of person, that advice isn't being taken on board, and it's not just a case of, well, it's going to take you X amount of time and it's going to cost you X amount of pounds, and we're going to need to hire 50 people. It's going to be the whole commercial cultural transformation piece that I think is going to be the differentiator to whether a business gets it right or not.
What are some of the better companies you would say that you've seen who have done this well?
So I think what this often comes down, I mean, look, if you were to kind of, try and draw it in black and white, I think that's a difficult question to answer, because it's often horses for courses. But the ones for me that I feel have got this right or have done the best with this are businesses that have gone out and they've built the team from the top down.
Right. Okay.
And I'd say 9 times out of 10, that happens the other way around, right? A business turns up one day, we're going to be data driven, right? And what does that actually mean? Well, it probably means they're going to go and hire a data scientist.
Data scientist, exactly.
But the businesses that have gone out and, they've hired a chief data officer, they've put them on the board, reporting to the CEO. And I know that's not always possible. But I mean, just the trends and the correlation all points that if data has its own voice at the top table, not to say there's anything wrong with it reporting to the CFO or the CIO or the CTO, because, sometimes that's just the way it works. But ultimately, I think, businesses that have done really well, they've got a CDO sat on the board reporting to the CEO. They've been able to build that leadership and management layer beneath them and then build the team from there. And I think, there's a very strong correlation between businesses that have structured themselves in that way, and the ones that have, won industry awards, and these people who are, in these leadership positions, winning industry awards and all of that type of stuff. So that'd be my main observation, really, because ultimately most do it the other way around, right? We want to become data driven. They go hire a data scientist who's, only ever job before has been building models, and they build a load of great models, but they don't add any value to the business, and they're probably not at a level where they can do that whole commercial piece and transformation piece within the business. And then all that happens is the business says, this data thing doesn't work.
And the skepticism gets in, and they won't touch it again for another couple of years, and they realize that their competitors are way ahead of them. So back to the whole NED bit then. So is that a real driver within the industry now? Is there sort of, the I don't know whether you want to call it a data strategy NED or, whatever that might be. Is that now currently becoming a thing?
I think it's becoming a thing. I think it's probably being driven more by us as a community than it is by organizations and business leaders. But I think there's going to be more appetite for that. I kind of see that for whatever reason, again, organizations I mean, how many years now have organizations been going to the likes of Bain and bringing them in? They give them the advice, and 12 months later, they come back in. Nothing's changed, and they give them the same advice, and they're paying millions of pounds for this advice. For whatever reason, there's just seemingly a lack of trust there. Or, you know, they're not quite bought into the advice they're being given for whatever reason. So I kind of, it almost seems like there needs to be a singular NED that's, you know, not part of any groups or businesses, someone that this person can really rely on and trust. And yes, I mean, but I think that's being driven more so by us as an industry, because I think, you know, those data leadership figures are I've kind of identified that that's really what's going to help to drive that change. But again, I think the way I look at that is that the people that we need to be having these conversations with often aren't involved in these conversations yet. So it's like, how do we get there? You know, often a lot of the stuff, you know, you and I put on LinkedIn, it gets lots of engagement. Everyone's like, yeah, you know, absolutely agree. But it's kind of like, well, we're always preaching to the choir.
Exactly. Yep. So you run a lot of events, round tables. What's the idea about that?
I mean, I started doing that several years ago now. It's more of a case of, you know, trying to get people, data leadership figures, really in a room together to share, you know, real life experiences, use cases. You know, we pull these people together and, you know, give them a platform really to kind of talk and share ideas, share knowledge, share use cases. This worked, this didn't. You know, if you're doing this, learn from my mistakes. And you know, and that's really what it's all about. Because I think what I've noticed, and I'm sure you'll be the same to me, right? Most businesses have very similar challenges, often just different size and scale, you know. So we're often talking about the same things. It's just, you know, if you're a FTSE 100, obviously the scale is going to be much bigger than if you're a startup, for example. But ultimately, a lot of the work that's being undertaken is very similar, you know. So it's just trying to create a community really where people can come together and learn from each other, and you know, the topics are sculpted by them, you know. So I speak to them and say, look, what's on your mind? If you were to get these people in a room, what would you want to talk about? We put it to a voting system, and they all choose. And
so it's really run by the people who are, it's not heavily influenced by you in that sense. It's more about what their challenges are. And so when is your next one, or where can people learn more about this?
So the next one's actually on Wednesday. So
bit too late
then. Fully booked. We used to do them obviously face to face, of course, in person, which was great. And maybe one day we'll get back to that. At the minute, they're all run over VC. I think, you know, the problem with all of this stuff is that there's only so many people you can get around a round table, right? And there's an awful lot of appetite for it, which is a great problem to have, but ultimately
so much you can do.
Only so much you can do.
Yeah. So what do you see as the next trends then in the market?
I mean, I think
crystal ball and everything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the data academy piece is going to be pretty big. I think if there's going to be one thing that can help move the needle a little bit, it might be, because I think that's going to bring the people that we're talking about that often aren't involved in these debates and conversations on LinkedIn. It's going to bring them into that conversation, which I think might start to help us to kind of realize some value from this and get them a little more bought in. I think that's going to be a big piece. Obviously, the whole digital thing, just with the way that the world's gone and was forced to go through COVID, you know, I think there's going to be a lot of investment into that digital analytics space, you know, whether you're an e-commerce business or not, you know, because more people are now going to be shopping online than they ever have done before. Absolutely. And, you know, not walking past shops, stores, and footfall drops.
Well, look, Kyle, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's been really great to have you. And where can people find you?
Find me on LinkedIn 24/7. I'm not hard to find. In fact, I'll probably find you first. So.
Yeah, it's true. Well, look, it's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
No
Thanks a
problem.
lot.
Thank you very much for having me. Cheers.
Cheers.